Have you ever stopped to think why some people simply don't need anyone? Why do some individuals seem completely comfortable in their own company, while most of us panic at the idea of being alone? What makes someone so dangerously independent that no emotional manipulation works on them? The answer might make a lot of people uncomfortable, because it exposes a truth that society prefers to ignore. Whoever isn't afraid of solitude can't be controlled. Maybe you've met someone like this before. Someone who accepts your cancellations without complaining, who doesn't demand your presence, who always seems calm, and you thought you were dealing with someone easy. But in reality, you were facing something much more powerful, someone who doesn't depend on you for anything. There's a specific type of person who scares others without doing absolutely anything. It's not someone aggressive, not someone who imposes fear through force or a loud voice. It's someone who simply doesn't care about being alone. And that, for those used to playing emotional games, is terrifying. Because all traditional manipulation tactics depend on one thing: the fear of abandonment. When you threaten to leave, the person begs you to stay. When you fake indifference, the person desperately seeks your attention. When you cancel plans, the person accepts whatever crumbs you offer afterward. But what happens when none of that works? What happens when the person simply says, "That's fine," and moves on? That's when the game ends. And whoever was manipulating realizes, too late, that they lost someone who never needed to be played. These people don't make scenes. They don't send desperate messages. They don't flood you with questions about where you were or why you took so long to respond. They simply keep living. And that continuity is scary, because it reveals that you were never as important as you thought you were, that your presence, though perhaps appreciated, was never necessary. And for those who use other people's need as emotional currency, that's the end of all power. Society has a serious problem with those who choose solitude. There's an automatic narrative that assumes every person alone is weak, desperate, needy, ready to accept any kind of treatment just to avoid being isolated. When someone's been single for a long time, people ask, "What's wrong with you?" When someone prefers to spend the weekend alone instead of going out, they're called antisocial. When someone declines invitations without elaborate explanations, they're labeled arrogant or weird. But it almost never crosses people's minds that this choice could be exactly that: a choice, not an escape, not a defense, not a protective mechanism against pain, but a genuine preference. And this confusion between solitude and neediness is one of the biggest mistakes someone can make when evaluating another person. Because when you assume someone is alone out of weakness, you make the fatal mistake of underestimating the strength that person actually has. You think you can treat them any way you want, because deep down they need you. You believe you can cancel, delay, fail, disappoint, and still they'll be there. Because they have no choice. Because they're desperate for any company. But when you act like this with someone who genuinely likes being alone, you're not gaining power. You're digging your own exit. Because these people have something most don't have: the ability to leave you without hesitation. Being alone and being lonely are two completely different things. Being lonely is suffering with the absence of others. It's feeling an emptiness that only someone's presence can fill. It's needing external validation to feel whole. It's depending on conversations, on company, on attention to not sink into dark thoughts. Being lonely is waking up in the morning and the first thing you feel is a weight on your chest because you have no one to message. It's looking at your phone hoping someone reaches out to you. It's spending the entire day waiting for a notification that makes you feel less invisible. It's that constant anguish of not being enough, of not being interesting, of not being important to anyone. But being alone? Being alone is a completely different experience. It's chosen silence. It's space to think without interruptions. It's freedom to do what you want, when you want, without needing to negotiate with anyone. It's peace without the obligation to always be available. It's emotional balance that doesn't depend on anyone but yourself. Being alone is waking up without rushing, making coffee the way you like it, spending hours reading or watching something without needing to justify it. It's having time to know yourself, to understand your own thoughts, to build a life that makes sense to you, not to others. Not all solitude is pain. For some people, solitude is where they recharge. It's where they find clarity. It's where they feel strongest. And these people don't run from others. They simply don't need them to be happy. And that changes everything. Because when you don't need anyone, you become selective. You only allow into your life those who truly add something, who respect, who value. And everyone else? Everyone else stays outside, without drama, without explanation. They just don't get in. Disrespect never starts by shouting. It starts silently. It starts with small details that seem insignificant. A plan canceled at the last minute. A criticism disguised as a joke. A dry response when there used to be interest. A request for help ignored when you were always present. The message that takes hours to be answered when it used to be immediate. The support you gave but never received back. The promise that's made but never kept. And every time this happens, the person being disrespected makes a decision. Accept it or don't accept it. Most people accept it because they're afraid of losing. Because they think it's better to have someone, even if that someone treats the relationship as disposable, than to be alone. So they justify it. They create excuses in their own head. They think maybe the person is busy. They think maybe I'm overreacting. They think maybe it's better not to say anything so I don't seem needy. And with that, the disrespect increases, because the other person realizes they can do whatever they want without consequences. That they can neglect, diminish, forget, and still you'll be there. But there's a group of people who don't work that way. When someone seems always available, many start to abuse it. They treat your needs as less important. They forget to return what they receive. They assume the person will always be there, no matter the treatment. After all, who complains? Who demands? Who gives ultimatums? Nobody. So the behavior continues. And for a long time, it might even seem like it's working, until it doesn't work anymore, until the person simply disappears. And then comes the shock. Because nobody expected that. Nobody thought that person, so calm, so understanding, so patient, was capable of leaving without looking back. The reaction nobody expects doesn't come in the form of a fight. It doesn't come with screaming, accusations, or emotional demands. It comes in silence. Because whoever is comfortable alone doesn't need to argue, doesn't need to beg for respect, doesn't need to explain why being treated as a second option is unacceptable. These people simply observe, evaluate, make an internal calculation that's quick and precise. And when the conclusion arrives, there's no going back. There's no second chance. There's no negotiation. They just leave. And the most impressive part is that often the other person doesn't even notice. Because these people don't make a scene. They don't send long messages explaining everything. They don't give dramatic ultimatums. They simply start to distance themselves. They respond less. They show up less. They invest less. They stop making plans. They stop initiating conversations. They stop trying. And when the other person finally realizes something has changed, it's too late. Because the decision has already been made. And people who like being alone don't go back. They don't make empty threats. When they say it's over, it's truly over. There's no back and forth game. There's no drama of breaking up and reconciling a week later. When these people decide you no longer deserve the space you occupied in their life, done. You become the past. And nothing you do will change that. Because they're not acting out of anger. They're not trying to punish you. They simply concluded that you're not worth the time they have. And time, for these people, is the most valuable resource that exists. The internal calculation these people make is extremely simple. It doesn't involve drama. It doesn't involve revenge. It doesn't involve harbored resentment. It's just a direct question. Does this relationship add or drain? If it adds, it's worth investing time, energy, attention. If it drains, it's not worth it. And the word drains here has a very specific meaning. It doesn't mean the other person is bad. It doesn't mean there was betrayal or something terrible. It just means the relationship demands more than it delivers. That there's more disrespect than reciprocity. That there's more demand than exchange. That there's more expectation than real presence. That you're giving a lot and receiving little. That you're making an effort while the other person just takes advantage. That you're investing in something that's not growing. And for those comfortable alone, that's unacceptable. Because these people know exactly the value of their own time. They know that life is finite. They know that every hour invested in something that doesn't nourish is an hour lost. And they prefer to spend that time alone, doing what they like, than wasting it on relationships that don't make sense. They prefer to read a book, They prefer to watch a movie. They prefer to walk alone. They prefer to sit in silence thinking. They prefer anything other than pretending everything's okay when it's not. So, when the answer to that question is drains, the decision is already made. There's no doubt. There's no hesitation. There's no, I'll give it one more chance. The exit has already begun. And it doesn't matter how many years of history exist. It doesn't matter how many good memories were built. If in the present the relationship drains more than it nourishes, it's over. Because these people live in the present, not in the past. And the present is clearly saying that it's no longer worth it. And the exit happens without warning, without drama, without long speeches about disappointment or unmet expectations. The person simply distances themselves, stops responding with the same frequency, stops making plans, stops investing emotional energy. And the most curious thing is that the other person often doesn't even notice at first. Because there was no fight, there was no official break, there wasn't that conversation where everything is laid on the table. Little by little, the presence diminishes until it disappears completely. The messages that used to be answered in minutes now take hours. The invitations that used to be accepted with enthusiasm are now politely declined. The intimacy that used to exist now gives way to distant cordiality. And when the other person finally notices this change, when they finally realize that person is no longer around, it's already over. Because people who like being alone don't threaten. When they decide to leave, they really leave. There's no going back. There's no second chance. There's no room for promises to change. They move on. And this isn't coldness. It's not lack of feelings. It's self-preservation. It's emotional independence. It's the rare ability to understand that being alone is infinitely better than being in bad company. It's preferring the peace of your own company to the chaos of an unbalanced relationship. It's choosing dignity over convenience. It's valuing yourself above the need to have someone, anyone, by your side. And this choice, although it seems harsh to those on the other side, is actually one of the healthiest forms of self-love that exists. Why aren't there second chances? Because second chances are for those who need them, for those who are afraid of being alone, for those who think maybe they won't find anything better, for those who still believe the other person will change, for those willing to accept excuses and empty promises just to keep someone around. But those who are happy alone don't need any of that. They don't need to wait. They don't need to insist. They don't need to give opportunity after opportunity hoping something will improve. These people understand a fundamental truth. When someone wants to treat you well, they do. They don't need warnings. They don't need chances. They don't need ultimatums. They simply treat you well because they want to, because they value you, because they understand what they have. And when that doesn't happen, there's no reason to insist. It's not coldness. It's not heartlessness. It's simply the clarity that you can't force anyone to value you. And if you need to force it, it's not worth it anymore. If you need to explain to someone why it's wrong to always cancel on you. If you need to teach someone that your messages deserve a response. If you need to beg for a minimum of consideration, then that person doesn't deserve you. And people who like being alone understand this without needing to spend years in therapy to figure it out. They simply know. So the person leaves. Without resentment, without hatred, without desire for revenge. Just with the certainty that they deserve something different. And if that something different doesn't appear, that's fine. Because being alone was never the problem. The problem was always being with someone who doesn't value you. And that problem has been solved. Society judges these people completely wrong. There's a tendency to label whoever is emotionally independent as cold, distant, incapable of loving, selfish. As if the ability to be alone were synonymous with contempt for others. As if not needing anyone meant not liking anyone. As if emotional independence were the same as indifference. But this couldn't be further from the truth. People like this don't hate people. They just don't depend on them to be happy. And that's a gigantic difference. Because dependency isn't love. Dependency is need. It's panic. It's desperation disguised as affection. When you need someone to feel complete, you're not choosing that person. You're clinging to them because you're afraid of the emptiness that would come without them. You're with them not because they make you feel good, but because without them, you feel bad. And that's not healthy. That's not true connection. That's emotional dependency. But when you don't need anyone, when you're whole by yourself, your choice is genuine. If you decide to be with someone, it's because you want to, not because you need to. And that makes the relationship infinitely healthier. Because there's no emotional demand. There's no manipulation. There's no blackmail like, if you leave me, I'll suffer. Just choice. Just presence. Just real exchange. This doesn't mean these people don't value deep connections or think they should never rely on anyone. It just means they've understood something fundamental. You can be independent and still choose to connect. You cannot need anyone and still want someone by your side. The balance is in being able to be alone without suffering, but choosing to be accompanied when that company adds value. And paradoxically, it's exactly this independence that makes these people capable of truly loving. Because they don't love out of fear. They love out of will. And that type of love, though rarer, is infinitely more valuable. Dependency is not connection. Dependency is fear. It's that feeling that you can't function without the other person. That your happiness depends on their presence. That your self-esteem is tied to the validation they give you. That your day is only good if they reached out to you. That you only feel good when you're with them or talking to them. This isn't love. This isn't partnership. This is emotional imprisonment disguised as romance. And many people confuse these two things. They think the more they need someone, the more they love. They think missing someone all the time is proof of true feeling. They think not being able to live without someone is intensity. They think jealousy is passion. They think anguish in absence is depth. But it's not. It's fragility. It's emotional immaturity. Because maturity is understanding that you can be happy alone. That your happiness is your responsibility, not someone else's. And when you reach that point, your choices change. You stop accepting anything out of fear of solitude. You stop tolerating disrespect so you don't lose someone. You stop diminishing yourself to fit into small spaces. You stop begging for attention. You stop accepting crumbs. You simply choose to be with whoever values you. And if nobody's valuing you, you choose yourself. And that's not selfishness. It's self-preservation. It's dignity. It's self-love. It's understanding that you deserve to be treated well. And if nobody is willing to do that, you're not going to lower yourself. You'll simply move on alone, in peace, until you find someone who understands your value. Or until you realize that maybe you don't even need someone to be complete. Without fear of losing, there's no way to manipulate. All emotional control tactics depend on one single thing: fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of being alone. Fear of not finding anything better. Fear of growing old alone. Fear of being judged by society. Fear of not being enough for anyone. When you remove that fear from the equation, the game ends. Because how are you going to control someone who isn't afraid to leave? How are you going to emotionally blackmail someone who prefers solitude to toxic company? How are you going to play games with someone who simply doesn't play? How are you going to use silence as punishment with someone who loves silence? How are you going to threaten to leave to someone who won't hold you back? You can't. These people are immune. Not because they're cold. Not because they don't feel. But because they understand that no relationship is worth the loss of their own peace. No company is worth the price of dignity. No presence is worth the cost of self-respect. And when you truly understand this, you become uncontrollable. Not in the sense of being rebellious or defiant, but in the sense that nobody can bend you with guilt, with pressure, with veiled threats. You simply don't care. And this indifference to external control is one of the most powerful forms of freedom that exists. Because you're not reacting, you're not defending yourself, you're not trying to prove anything. You're simply living according to your own standards. And whoever doesn't fit those standards stays out. Without drama, without explanation, they just stay out. If you're enjoying this content, maybe you'll also like our exclusive material in the first pinned comment. If someone who doesn't need anyone chooses you, that means something profound. It means you weren't accepted for lack of options. You weren't chosen because the person was afraid of being alone. You weren't kept out of pity or emotional dependency. You were chosen because somehow your presence adds value. Because being with you is better than being alone. And for people who truly enjoy their own company, that's a gigantic compliment. Because they don't need you. They want you. And that's a difference that changes everything. Because when someone chooses you out of necessity, the relationship is fragile. Anything can destabilize it. Any fight can seem like the end of the world. Any distance can generate insecurity. Any change can cause panic. The person lives in fear of losing you because without you they don't know who they are. But when someone chooses you out of will, the relationship is solid. Because there's no desperation. There's no dependency. There's no irrational fear of losing. Just conscious presence. Just daily decision to continue. Just renewed choice every day. And this, paradoxically, makes the relationship much stronger. Because it exists by choice, not by prison. Because the person is with you because they want to, not because they need to. Because they truly value you, not because they're afraid of being without you. And when you understand that someone like this chose you, you should treat it as the treasure it is. Because it's not every day that someone who doesn't need anyone decides you're worth it. But there's a moment when everything starts to end. And that moment is exactly when the choice is taken for granted. When the person who chose you realizes you stopped valuing, stopped investing, stopped treating with care, stopped recognizing what you have. When you start acting as if that person is obligated to be there, as if they had no other option, as if you could do anything and they'd stay, as if their presence was your right, not a gift. That's the moment when the silent distancing begins. Because people who like being alone have zero tolerance for being taken for granted. They don't need you. So, the second you forget that, the second you start to disrespect, neglect, treat with indifference, the countdown begins. And there's no warning. There's no demand. There's no dramatic discussion. The person simply starts to distance themselves. And when you realize, when you finally notice they're no longer so present, it's too late. Because the decision has already been made. And these people don't go back. They don't make threats to scare you and make you appreciate them. They simply leave. And you only realize it when they're already gone. When the messages stopped. When the plans ceased to exist. When intimacy turned into distant cordiality. And then you try to come back. Try to explain yourself. Try to promise you'll change. But it doesn't work. Because for these people, when it's over, it's over. There's no conversation that reverses it. There's no promise that convinces. They've already decided. And moved on. The self-respect of these people is completely non-negotiable. There's no situation, no shared history, no old feeling that makes them accept less than they deserve. Because they understand something fundamental. Being alone isn't punishment. It's not failure. It's not a sign that something is wrong with you. Being alone is just a state. And for those comfortable with it, it's a perfectly acceptable state. In fact, it's preferable to being in a relationship where you're disrespected. Preferable to being with someone who treats you as a second option. Preferable to accepting crumbs of attention just to not be alone. Preferable to living according to someone else's mood. Preferable to lowering your expectations so you don't bother anyone. Preferable to pretending everything's okay when you know it's not. These people simply don't do that. Not because they're proud. Not because they're incapable of forgiving. But because they understand their own value. And they understand that accepting disrespect is betraying yourself. It's giving up your own dignity. It's teaching others that you can be treated anyway. It's telling the world you don't care about yourself. And they refuse that. Categorically. Without exceptions. Without excuses. They prefer solitude. And there's nothing you can do to change that. No amount of guilt you can apply. No amount of promises you can make. No amount of shared history you can invoke. When these people decide you don't treat them with the respect they deserve, it's over. And you can cry. You can beg. You can promise you'll change. It won't work. Because they're not punishing you. They're protecting themselves. And for them, that's non-negotiable. This posture brings a freedom that almost nobody experiences. The freedom to leave without guilt. The freedom to say no without justifying yourself. The freedom to maintain standards without fear of being alone because of it. The freedom to refuse what doesn't serve without feeling bad. The freedom to choose your own peace above any relationship. Most people don't have this freedom because they're trapped by fear. Fear of disappointing. Fear of being rejected. Fear of not finding anyone else. Fear of growing old alone. Fear of being seen as difficult, demanding, problematic. Fear of being judged by family. Fear of being questioned by friends. Fear of being the only single person in the group. Fear of spending holidays alone. fear of not having anyone to share life with. And because of these fears, they accept things they shouldn't accept. They stay in relationships they shouldn't stay in. They tolerate behaviors they shouldn't tolerate. They give up pieces of themselves just to keep someone around. But people who like being alone don't have these fears. Or rather, they might have them. But they choose not to let those fears control their decisions. They understand that the fear of being alone isn't reason enough to give up on yourself. It's not reason enough to accept less. It's not reason enough to diminish yourself. And with that, they live a life that's genuinely free. Free from games. Free from manipulation. Free from relationships that drain. Free to choose and to reject and to simply exist in peace. Free to wake up and not have to deal with anyone's bad mood. Free to make plans without needing to consult anyone. Free to change your mind without needing to explain. Free to live according to your own values, not values someone else imposes. And this brings us to the final warning. If you have someone like this in your life, value them. Because when these people leave, they don't come back. It doesn't matter how much you beg. It doesn't matter how many excuses you give. It doesn't matter how many promises to change you make. Once they decide you don't deserve the space you occupied in their life, it's over. And it's not because they don't have a heart. It's not because they're resentful or vindictive. It's because they simply don't need you. And when you treat badly someone who doesn't need you, you lose. You lose forever. Without a second chance. Without negotiation. Without return. So, if you know someone who is comfortable alone, who doesn't beg for attention, who doesn't panic when you distance yourself, who doesn't accept any kind of treatment just to keep you around, understand what you have. Understand that this person is with you because they want to be, not because they need to be. And treat that with the respect it deserves. Because if you don't, they'll leave. And you'll miss someone who never needed you, but chose you anyway. And that's the most painful loss of all. Because you didn't lose someone who was desperate for your company. You lost someone who was fine alone, but still decided you were worth it. And when that person concludes you're no longer worth it, there's no going back. There's no rebuilding. There's no reconciliation. There's only the memory of what could have been, if you had valued them while you had the chance. I totally understand when you look at these people and don't get it. When you think they're cold, distant, incapable of truly connecting. When you think something must be wrong with them because they don't desperately seek your attention. But I'm not saying this to make you anxious, but to wake you up to a truth that can save many of your relationships. Emotional independence isn't rejection. It's maturity. It's strength. It's mental health. And I'm not saying you need to become completely self-sufficient and never need anyone. Balance is healthy. Having people you trust, people you can count on, is important. But there's a huge difference between being able to count on someone and not being able to live without someone. Between appreciating company and depending on it to feel whole. Between choosing to be together and being afraid of being alone. And if you have someone like this by your side, someone who could be perfectly fine alone but chooses to be with you, value that. Because these people are rare. They don't accept just anything. They don't stay out of fear. They don't attach out of dependency. They're with you because they genuinely want to be. And when they leave, they take with them a peace you might never find in anyone else again. They take the certainty that you were facing someone genuine, someone real, someone who didn't play games. And you lost that person, not because they were incapable of loving, but because you were incapable of valuing. So think carefully before taking for granted someone who never needed guarantees to be whole. Because by the time you realize their value, it might be too late. And people who like being alone don't wait. They simply move on. And they leave behind everything that no longer serves them. Without remorse, without regret. They just move on. And you're left with the question that won't go away. Why didn't I value them when I had the chance?